The heavy ticking of a grandfather clock abruptly replaced the suffocating stench of Brenda's synthetic rose perfume. My husband had stood by, watching me choke my last breath away. Yet here I was, staring at a wall calendar reading October 14th, 1987. I haven't just survived. I've been reborn with a single purpose: absolute ruin for them both. The first thing that hit me was the smell of bacon grease and stale cigarette smoke. It was a smell I hadn't breathed in 20 years, not since my lungs gave out in that sterile, lonely hospice room in my past life. I blinked, my vision blurring and then snapping sharply into focus. I was standing in the kitchen of our off-base housing near Fort Campbell, Kentucky. My hands were gripping the edge of a hideous avocado green Formica countertop. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I looked down at my hands. They were smooth, unblemished by the decades of harsh labor and the IV lines that had eventually bruised them purple and yellow. I touched my face. My skin was tight, youthful. I spun around, my eyes darting across the room. The rotary phone hung on the wall. The calendar next to the fridge confirmed the impossible truth. October 14th, 1987. I had come back in my previous life. Today was the day my descent into hell truly began. Today was the day my father's life insurance check, a staggering $85,000, was cleared. Today was the day my mother-in-law, Margaret Hughes, had bullied me into endorsing that check over to my husband, Captain Richard Hughes, under the guise of securing our family's future. And within 3 years, Richard would use that exact money to buy a secret suburban home for his mistress, Brenda Walsh, leaving me penniless, disgraced, and entirely dependent on the toxic in-laws who treated me like an indentured servant. "Anna, are you deaf, girl?" The shrill, grating voice sliced through the air like a rusty scalpel. I froze, the blood running cold in my veins. I turned to see her standing in the doorway. Margaret Hughes. She was wearing her signature silk robe, her hair set in rigid rollers, looking at me with the same sneering disdain she had worn every single day of my first life. "I asked for my Earl Grey 10 minutes ago," Margaret snapped, marching into the kitchen and aggressively tapping her manicured fingernail against the counter. "Richard is a respected officer in the United States Army. The least you can do, as a woman of your pedestrian background, is keep his household running efficiently. Is the tea ready, or do I have to make it myself?" In my past life, I would have stuttered an apology. I would have felt the burning shame of inadequacy. I would have rushed to pour the hot water, terrified of displeasing the mother of the man I thought I loved. Instead, a chilling calmness washed over me. The ghost of the broken, dying woman I used to be stepped aside, replaced by a cold, calculating survivor. I picked up the steaming kettle from the stove. I looked at the delicate floral teacup Margaret had set out for herself. Then, maintaining dead-even eye contact with my mother-in-law, I tilted the kettle and poured the boiling water directly down the stainless steel sink. Hiss. The steam billowed up between us. Margaret's jaw dropped so hard, her rollers shook. What in God's name are you doing, you stupid girl?" I set the kettle down with a loud, final clank. "Make it yourself, Margaret, and while you're at it, pack your bags. You're leaving my house by the end of the week." For a full 10 seconds, there was absolute silence. Margaret looked as though I had just struck her across the face with a brick. Her face turned a mottled, furious red. "Your house! Your house! Richard pays the rent. Richard commands this family when he gets home from the base. Richard doesn't own me, and neither do you. I cut her off, my voice dangerously low. I grabbed my purse from the kitchen chair and pulled out the keys to the Oldsmobile. If you don't like it, you can call him at the base. Tell him his wife finally woke up. I didn't wait for her sputtering response. I walked out the front door, the crisp autumn air hitting my face like a baptism. I got into the car, the vinyl seats cold against my legs, and drove straight to the First National Bank on Elm Street. When I walked through the heavy glass doors, the familiar scent of polished wood and ink greeted me. I marched directly to the desk of Mrs. Higgins, the senior branch manager. "Mrs. Hughes, how lovely to see you." She smiled warmly, adjusting her thick-rimmed glasses. "Mrs. Higgins, I need to make a transfer immediately," I said, my tone strictly business. "The wire from my father's estate in Ohio cleared this morning. $85,000. Yes, your husband called about an hour ago. He said you'd be coming in to transfer it into the joint savings account." He called. Of course he did. He couldn't wait to get his hands on my dead father's legacy. "There's been a change of plans," I said smoothly, leaning over her desk. "I want to open a new private account, solely in my name, Anna Jenkins. No joint access. I want every single penny of that inheritance moved into it right now, and I need you to put a security note on the file. Captain Richard Hughes is not authorized to even check the balance." Mrs. Higgins blinked, clearly taken aback by the breach in 1980s marital protocol, but she was a professional. Are you sure, Anna? It is quite a large sum." I have never been more sure of anything in my entire life. It took 45 minutes of signing papers, but when I walked out of that bank, I had a cashier's check and a new bank book buried at the bottom of my purse. The financial chains Richard had used to drown me in my first life were broken. But taking the money wasn't enough. I needed to destroy his reputation. In the military in 1987, a soldier's career rested entirely on the appearance of an impeccable moral character. Adultery wasn't just a marital failure. It was a punishable offense under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. I drove across town to a dingy strip mall in Clarksville. Tucked between a laundromat and a dive bar was the office of Harding Investigations. I walked in and dropped $500 in crisp, newly withdrawn cash on the desk of John Harding, a gritty retired cop who smelled faintly of bourbon. "I need you to tail my husband," I told him, "Captain Richard Hughes. He claims he's working late at the motor pool on Tuesday and Thursday nights. He's not. He's at the Starlight Motel on Highway 41 with a civilian secretary named Brenda Walsh. I want photographs, John. I want timestamps. I want undeniable proof." John Harding looked at the cash, then looked up at my dead, unblinking eyes. He swept the money into his drawer. "You'll have them by Friday morning, Mrs. Hughes." Richard came home at 6:30 p.m., the screen door slamming behind him. I was sitting in the living room, a magazine open on my lap, pretending to read. He walked in, looking every inch the American hero. Tall, broad-shouldered, his green Class A uniform immaculately pressed. But as he leaned in to give me a perfunctory peck on the cheek, my stomach violently churned. There it was. Barely masking the smell of his Old Spice aftershave was the sickly sweet, unmistakable scent of Brenda's synthetic rose perfume. "Rough day, sweetheart," Richard sighed, unbuttoning his collar. "The motor pool was a nightmare. Margaret tells me you two had a little spat this morning. She was crying in the guest room when I got in." "Did she?" I turned a page of my magazine, not looking up. "She'll survive." Richard frowned, clearly unsettled by my lack of groveling. Usually, a complaint from his mother would send me into a panic of apologies and baked goods. "Anna, you need to show my mother some respect. We're letting her stay here." I thought she was staying here because her husband, Arthur, gambled away their mortgage in Atlantic City, I replied coolly, finally meeting his gaze. Richard's face hardened, his jaw ticking. "We don't talk about that. Listen to me. Colonel Miller and his wife, Patricia, are coming for dinner this Saturday. It's a huge deal for my promotion to major. I need everything perfect. The roast, the silver, everything." He paused, looking away for a fraction of a second. The classic tell of a liar. "Oh, and I've invited a colleague from the clerical pool, Brenda Walsh. She's new to the base, doesn't know anyone, and the colonel likes it when we show hospitality to the civilian staff." Hospitality. In my past life, I had spent 2 days cooking a feast for the woman who was sleeping with my husband. I had practically served them their affair on a silver platter, completely blind to the foot-footsie they were playing under my own dining table. "Of course, Richard," I smiled. It was a terrifying smile, but he was too arrogant to notice. "I'll make sure Brenda gets exactly what she deserves." Saturday arrived. By 5 p.m., Harding Investigations had delivered. A manila envelope was currently resting at the bottom of the flour bin in my pantry. Inside were 8 glorious 35mm black and white photographs of Richard and Brenda. 2 showed them walking into room 114 at the Starlight Motel. 3 showed them kissing passionately by his army-issued jeep. The final photos showed them leaving the room 3 hours later, Richard tucking his shirt in, Brenda fixing her lipstick. The doorbell rang at 7 p.m. sharp. I opened the door to greet Colonel Miller, a stern, intimidating veteran of Vietnam with zero tolerance for nonsense, and his elegant wife, Patricia. Right behind them was Richard, practically glowing with false charm, and Brenda. Brenda Walsh was wearing a pale blue dress that was just a little too tight, her blonde hair teased high in true 80s fashion. She looked at me with a sickeningly sweet smile, but I saw the triumphant gleam in her eyes, the look of a woman who thought she was holding the winning hand. "Anna, it's so lovely to finally meet you," Brenda chirped, stepping inside and aggressively invading my personal space. "Richard talks about you all the time. He says you're just so domestic, and he talks about you, Brenda," I replied smoothly, taking her coat. "Though mostly he just talks about your paperwork." The dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare. I served the pot roast, pouring the wine, playing the perfect, submissive 1980s military wife. Margaret sat at the end of the table, glaring daggers at me but remaining quiet because the colonel was present, because halfway through the meal, Brenda made her move. She reached across the table, her hand accidentally brushing Richard's, and sighed. "You know, Colonel, Richard is just so dedicated. He works so many late nights at the motor pool. I see his jeep there all the time when I'm leaving the clerical office." Richard puffed out his chest. "Duty calls, Brenda. You know how it is." "Such dedication," I echoed, standing up from my chair and tapping my spoon against my crystal wine glass. Clink, clink, clink. The table went silent. All eyes turned to me. "I'd actually like to propose a toast," I said, my voice ringing out clear and steady in the dining room. "To dedication, and to the late nights my husband spends serving his country." Richard chuckled nervously, shooting me a warning look. "Sit down, Anna. You're embarrassing yourself." "Not yet, I'm not," I replied. I walked over to the sideboard and picked up the thick manila envelope I had placed there earlier. I walked directly to Colonel Miller and set the envelope down next to his plate. "What is this, Anna?" Colonel Miller asked, his thick grey eyebrows knitting together. Just a little portfolio of Captain Hughes's extracurricular dedication, sir, I said lightly. Since my husband is up for promotion to major, I thought it was only right that his commanding officer see exactly how he spends his Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Richard's face drained of all colour. Anna, stop this right now. Sir, my wife hasn't been well. Colonel Miller ignored him. He opened the clasp of the envelope and pulled out the 8x10 glossy photographs. The silence that fell over the dining room was absolute, suffocating, and beautiful. It was the sound of a man's life ending. Colonel Miller stared at the top photograph. Then he flipped to the next one, and the next. The stern lines of his face deepened into a terrifying mask of fury. Beside him, Patricia leaned over, caught sight of the photos, and let out a horrified gasp, covering her mouth with her napkin. "Sir," Richard stammered, his confident facade shattering as he tried to peer across the table at the photos. "Sir, I don't know what she's showing you, but it's a lie." Colonel Miller slammed the photographs down onto the polished oak table. The loud smack made Margaret jump in her seat. The photo on top was crystal clear. Richard, in his military uniform, aggressively making out with Brenda Walsh outside room 114 of the Starlight Motel. "Is this a lie, Captain?" Colonel Miller roared, his voice shaking the crystal glasses. Brenda let out a high-pitched shriek when she saw the photo, dropping her fork. It clattered loudly against her plate. She pushed her chair back, looking around like a trapped rat. That's doctored! That's fake!" "The private investigator who took them last Thursday at 8:15 p.m. will gladly testify under oath at the court-martial," I said, leaning casually against the back of my chair. I looked at my husband. He was sweating profusely, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The arrogant, powerful man who had watched me die in my past life was gone, replaced by a pathetic, terrified boy. "Anna," Richard whispered, his voice cracking. "How could you?" "How could I what, Richard?" I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "Interrupt your dessert?" Margaret, finally realizing what was happening, stood up, her face purple with rage. "You ungrateful bitch! You set him up! You dare ruin my son's career in his own house!" "Actually, Margaret," I said, pulling a folded piece of paper from my pocket and tossing it onto the table next to the photos. "This house is rented under my name. The lease was signed by me. And speaking of money, Richard, you'll find that the $85,000 you tried to steal from my father's estate is safely locked away in a private account you will never, ever touch." Richard slumped back in his chair, utterly paralyzed by the shock of my change. He looked at me as if he were staring at a ghost. In a way, he was. The weak, obedient Anna he had married was dead, and the woman standing in her place was going to burn his entire world to the ground. "Get your coat, Patricia," Colonel Miller ordered, his voice cold and hard as a block of ice. He didn't look at Richard again. He didn't have to. The disgust radiating from the older man was enough to strip the rank right off my husband's shoulders. Patricia Miller stood up, smoothing down her wool skirt. She walked over to me, bypassing Brenda as if the trembling blonde woman were nothing but a stain on the rug. "The pot roast was exquisite, Anna," Patricia said softly, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "If you need a place to stay, while the dust settles, my door is always open to you." "Thank you, Patricia. But I'll be staying right here," I replied, my voice steady. Colonel Miller paused at the door. He turned back, his steely gaze pinning Richard to the spot. "Captain Hughes, you will report to my office at 0600 on Monday morning. Do not be late, and do not think you can lie your way out of this. You've disgraced the uniform." The front door clicked shut. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by Brenda's pathetic, jagged breathing. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing her purse. "Richard, Richard, do something," she hissed, tears ruining her heavy mascara. "He's going to fire me. He's going to ruin your career." Richard snapped out of his shock, his face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He lunged across the table, knocking over a crystal wine glass. The red liquid bled into the white lace tablecloth like a fresh wound. "You crazy bitch!" Richard roared, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "Do you have any idea what you've just done? I'll kill you! I'll take every dime you have, and I'll throw you out on the street." In my past life, I would have cowered. I would have believed him. But the woman he married died in a sterile hospital bed, choking on regrets. I merely picked up my napkin and dabbed the corner of my mouth. "You won't do a damn thing, Richard," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. I reached over to the wall and picked up the rotary phone. "Because if you take one step closer to me, I will dial the Clarksville Police Department, and I will let them know that an erratic, aggressive man is trespassing in my home." "Trespassing!" Margaret shrieked, finally finding her voice. She marched toward me, her silk robe flapping. "You ungrateful little tramp! This is my son's house. I am the matriarch of this family, and I demand you pack your things and get out. You're nothing but white trash from Ohio." I slowly hung up the phone and looked at my mother-in-law, the woman who had treated me like a maid, the woman who, in my previous timeline, had laughed when Richard moved Brenda into my home. "Margaret," I sighed, as if dealing with a slow child, "did you not hear me earlier? Let me spell it out. I signed the lease on this off-base property. My name is on the rental agreement, not Richard's, and as of this morning, I have officially withdrawn my permission for either of you to reside here." I pulled a pair of folded documents from the pocket of my cardigan and slapped them onto the table. 30-day notice of eviction for Captain Richard Hughes, filed and stamped by the county clerk today, I announced. Then I turned my eyes to Margaret. "And a 24-hour notice for you, Margaret. You are a guest, not a tenant. You have until tomorrow evening to get your cheap luggage out of my guest room, or I will drag it to the curb myself and set it on fire." "You can't do this!" Richard yelled, grabbing the papers and tearing them in half. "I am your husband. What's yours is mine." "Not in the state of Tennessee, Richard. Not when it comes to a direct inheritance, and certainly not when I have photographic proof of your adultery." I smiled, relishing the panic in his eyes. "Now get out, both of you. Go sleep at the Starlight Motel with Brenda. I hear room 114 is lovely this time of year." Brenda let out a sob, turned on her heel, and ran out the front door into the chilly October night. Richard stood there, his chest heaving, his fists clenched so tight his knuckles were white. He wanted to hit me. I could see the violence simmering in his eyes. But he knew that if he laid a finger on me, his military career wouldn't just end in a discharge. It would end in a prison sentence in Leavenworth. "This isn't over, Anna," he spat, his voice trembling with fury. "I'll get a lawyer. I'll take that $85,000. I'll leave you with nothing." "Good luck paying a lawyer with your military pension," I shot back. "Oh, wait, you're about to lose that too." Richard turned and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the framed pictures on the wall rattled. Margaret stood frozen in the dining room, looking between the torn papers and me, her face pale and suddenly looking every one of her 65 years. "Anna, be reasonable," she stammered, her arrogant tone evaporating into pathetic desperation. "Where will I go? Arthur has no money. We have nothing." "I suggest you start packing, Margaret," I said coldly, turning my back on her to clear the dinner plates. Minimum wage jobs start early on Mondays. Monday, October 19th, 1987. In the financial world, it would become known as Black Monday, the day the stock market crashed, sending shockwaves across the globe. But in my world, it was the day I built my empire on the ashes of Richard Hughes's life. At 9 a.m., I sat in the plush, oak-paneled office of Thomas Abernathy, the most ruthless divorce attorney in Montgomery County. I had paid his exorbitant retainer in cash. I slid the manila envelope of photographs across his mahogany desk, along with a copy of my new bank statements and the eviction notices. Mr. Abernathy, a sharp-eyed man with silver hair and an impeccable suit, reviewed the documents. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "Mrs. Hughes, you have handed me a loaded gun with the safety off," he chuckled, tapping the photo of Richard and Brenda. "In the military, adultery isn't just a sin. It's a violation of Article 134 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice. It's conduct unbecoming an officer. Given Colonel Miller's reputation, your husband is facing a court-martial, forfeiture of pay, and a dishonorable discharge. I want the divorce expedited," I told him, sipping the black coffee his secretary had brought me. "I want to keep my entire inheritance, my car, and my dignity. He can have the debt on his credit cards." "Consider it done," Abernathy said. Meanwhile, on base, Richard's life was unraveling faster than I could have ever hoped. Colonel Miller did not hold back. The investigation was swift and brutal. Facing a public court-martial that would drag his name through the mud and potentially result in confinement, Richard was given an ultimatum: resign his commission immediately, forfeiting his pension and all military benefits, or face trial. The proud, arrogant Captain Hughes folded like a cheap lawn chair. He resigned in disgrace. Brenda, realizing that she had tied her wagon to a broke, unemployed man with no future, showed her true colors. The very week Richard was forced to clear out his locker, Brenda packed up her apartment and left town with a car salesman from Nashville. She didn't even leave Richard a note. The financial devastation hit my ex-husband hard. He tried to fight me for the $85,000, hiring a bottom-feeding lawyer on contingency. But Abernathy buried them in paperwork, legally proving the money was a protected inheritance that had never touched a joint marital account. And then came my real stroke of genius. Because I had lived through the next 30 years, I knew exactly what was coming. As the stock market bled out on Black Monday, sending the country into a panic, commercial real estate in the rapidly expanding suburbs of Nashville plummeted in price. Desperate sellers were offloading properties for pennies on the dollar. I took my $85,000, a massive sum in 1987, and walked into a commercial brokerage. While everyone else was selling in terror, I bought. I purchased 2 foreclosed strip malls and a small run-down apartment complex on the outskirts of the city outright. By the time the economy stabilized and boomed in the early 90s, my net worth had skyrocketed. A year after the divorce was finalized, I was driving my brand-new Mercedes-Benz through Clarksville when I stopped at a red light. I glanced out the window and saw a familiar figure dragging a trash can across the greasy pavement of a local fast food restaurant. It was Richard. He was wearing a stained paper hat and a polyester uniform, his broad shoulders stooped, his face deeply lined with stress and defeat. He looked up, and for a brief second, our eyes met through the tinted glass of my car. I saw the flash of recognition. I saw the crushing weight of his regret, the agonizing realization of what he had thrown away, and the bitter truth of what I had become without him. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I didn't feel anything for him at all. He was just a ghost from a past life that I had successfully exorcised. The light turned green. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator and drove away, leaving him in the rearview mirror where he belonged. I had died once as a victim, a suffocated woman trapped in an avocado-green kitchen. But I was reborn as a queen, and I would never let anyone steal my crown again. If you loved this story of ultimate revenge, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our daily drama. Have you ever had to deal with toxic in-laws or a cheating partner? Let me know how you handled it in the comments below. Share this video with anyone who needs a reminder to stand up for themselves. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more epic comebacks.